welcome back. Can we have those slides back?
Yes, Nico, all happening.
So we're going to dig a little bit deeper now into that culture transformation we went through, but I want to first have a chat about informality and formality in Orange organization. I don't know what kind of organization you work in, but the way we see the world in Orange organization is pretty much like what you are seeing on your screen right now. And we all, I use this, I stole this from Leandro actually. I like it very much. Like we have this disease in Orange organization, which is a back and neck disease, because we tend to look up all the time, thinking that everything's going to come from the top, that every problem will be solved from the top, that when there's a problem, it's the fault, it's the management's fault. And so the problems come from them, the solutions come from them, not my fault. And this is how like a typical organization of 20 people would look like. But if you click on the next slide, then the reality looks much more like that. So people are connected in a different way. And some of them, you know, went to school together. Others are having their kids in the same school. Others just sleep together. Others are jealous. And we have lots of different connections that have nothing to do with our different roles. And many of the discussions and actually most of the decisions are made also following other rules than just the ones that we tend to be looking at. And so these connections actually make a lot of what is really happening in the real world, even in our Orange organizations. And so when you know that, then it gives you a different lens to look at your organization and see if you want to change something, then maybe you should take this into consideration. So can we have the next slide? Because in fact, we are all of that, both the formal and the informal part of us we are sitting, we're on those both feet actually, and we are both of those. We are both in the formal world on your left-hand side here, with you have command and control and these rational decisions, and you have formal structures, and most of, I mean, the way things get done in this world is through information. So we share information. Oh, did you hear this? Did you know that? Oh no, yeah, tell me. And then you tend to think that if you have the information, you have everything. But at the same time, we are also on the right-hand side. We're also part of this formal world, informal world, where there's no command and control. I mean, there's no guideline when you get in the company. We don't give you a paper saying you should dress up like this. When I joined GSK, for instance, I very, very, very quickly understood that I should not wear a tie. Well, no one told me, it was not written anywhere, but I could just watch around and see, okay, if I want to be accepted in this space, I need to just drop my tie, which was very different in the company I was in before. So there's no user guide. What you do is you watch others and you just copy what's happening. And everything is driven by informal connections. And this is the world that you also operate in. And it's pretty schizophrenic because you need to balance both of them. You do this not very consciously, but you actually need both in order to survive. And if you think of culture as a set of behaviors you need to display in order to survive in an organization, well, then you need actually both sides, and you need to make sure you work with both. So what I wanted to do now is also talk a little bit about what's happened with COVID, and that's the next slide. You see on that new slide, you will see a display of how those connections look like before and after COVID. And it's quite, you're probably familiar with those kind of representations that come from organizational network analysis. And that's a study that was done in the same population before and after COVID. Actually, it was after 9 months. And so it would be interesting to look at it now and see how it has evolved even further. But what is interesting is that most of the people have refocused on their uh, most or strongest ties, I would say, or the ones they work with every day. But all those ties that you used to have, like people you bump in at the coffee machine or not intentional connections, have disappeared. And it's really a shame because those connections are the ones who are triggering um, sense of belonging because suddenly you're like, oh, how are you? It's been a long time, you know. Sure, we have like coffee. Do you have 10 minutes now? Yeah, okay, well, let's do that. So what are you working on these days and what are you doing? And those people that we connect with non-intentionally, they trigger different pathways in our brain and they help us look at things in a different way with two main benefits. But I guess I mean, we could say even more than that, but I would say two ones. One has to do with the well-being, feeling connected, and the other one has to do with innovation and creativity because they they are surprising. So they help you connect in a different way, and when you come back, it triggers different lines of thoughts. And so it is really detrimental to individuals, but also to organizations, and has a big impact on the way information, but mostly the way behaviors are spreading in the organization, and therefore culture. So that was very, very relevant for us to take into account when we were in the middle of our culture change program when this happened, and we had to take this into account. So now, based on those few slides of introduction, I wanted to, Philip, you want to run that? Wanted to know from you, you know, how much you think that culture change is leader-led, because we always say like, you know, culture change starts from the top. What do you think? You know, drop best guess in the chat. Is it like 100%? Is it 80%, 50%, 10%, 30, 50, 20, 20, 50? Great.
Can you see that? Yeah, 30,
Yes,
30,
yes.
20, 50, 20.
Okay, great. Well, there's no rocket science, right? So we don't know. It was never measured. Aniko says 100%. We all have our like 60% from Rebecca, 60 from Graham. Okay, thanks. We'll have our views on that, right? And there are all sorts of theories. I'm not going to give you a figure right now. But what I wanted to get you thinking about is knowing that both those formal and informal worlds live together. Maybe you need to find some sort of balance, and it's going to change from one company to the next. In some companies, you're going to require much more top-down or involvement of leadership if you want this to succeed. But in any case, you will always have these chit-chat corridor discussions. And also those people saying, oh, you know, he said that, but what are you going to do? And well, I don't know. Let's talk to Mary. Let's talk to John, and we'll see, you know, what they think. And this is going on, and then people will just adjust their behavior based on what others are going to do next to them. And actually, what they will probably most focus on is people they trust or people they look up to, people they like. They're different criteria, and those are the people they're going to follow, and they will watch the leader very, very intensely to see what's behind the words and whether the actions and the behaviors of the leaders are really in line with what he or she is saying. And people will align on what the leader does, not what the leader says. And this is one of the things that we wanted to do differently at GSK. So there was when we started our culture transformation, there was no announcement. There was no posters on walls. There was nothing really. It all went through discussion between people, peer-to-peer interactions. Can we go back to the slides, maybe, Philip? And I'll just carry on. Thank you for these. So interesting. Usually when you ask that question to different people, like a standard population, you get much higher percentages than the ones you put in the chat. So I can see that we are at Teal around the world here. What is interesting is that we don't this informality and peer-to-peer connection is actually very, very powerful and probably much more than we actually are aware of. This was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine published a few years ago. And it was showing that even in a condition like obesity, most of the biggest driver of what's driving obesity is whether one of your friends was obese, rather than your spouse, sibling, anyone from your family or neighbor or anything. Is a friend, so it's someone like you, someone you trust, someone you like. You're going to try to copy that person, and it was based. And I mean, the number of people that was in this study was huge. And uh, you are you could actually extend this to many other conditions, and addictions, any sort of social behavior, even maybe suicide and others, smoking behaviors. All of that's been documented, and the power of peer-to-peer is just huge. Can we have the next slide, please? So that slide is dead simple, but it's pretty deep. When we try to, most of you are like me in the business of change, and we tend to think that we need to convince people, and so we go through there like you would do in a coaching session. Pretty much, you help people think differently, understand that they have maybe limiting beliefs, helping them work on their belief, and your underlying assumption is that if you work on their belief and they suddenly realize why they should behave in a different way, then they will behave in a different way. And so most of the change programs are based on that. And so you're playing with the fact that either people get it and they want to change and therefore they will change. So you need to work on the why with them. Or if they don't do that, well, you just tell them to change and they will change. And that's the arrow going down. But the reality is that it's probably none of those, or maybe both of those together with the arrow in the middle here, because others are doing things. Then I'm probably need to do the same. I told you about the tie thing. I never wear ties anymore. I used to wear ties all the time. And maybe when I change company and I do something else, I'll probably behave in a different way again without even realizing I'm just copying what's around me. I don't know what about you, but at home, when my kids grow up, we didn't have any manual or anything. We didn't train them. I didn't ask them, what their belief system is and so on. They just copied what my wife and I were doing and what their siblings were doing, what their friends are doing. And this is the way it all forms into their behavior, which they make their own. And then usually they build this sort of mental construct that goes with their behavior. I guess you could think of the same for people smoking. I don't know if you're a smoker, but most of the time the reason why you smoke is not because you have a set of beliefs that makes you think that you should smoke. It happened in a different way, and then you build some sort of thinking around it, rationale or whatever story that you tell yourself to continue with your behavior. And so if you want someone to quit smoking, maybe you don't need to try and convince them because, uh, smoking kills on each pack of cigarette is not really changing behaviors of people. Next slide, please. So the idea here is, okay, how about we take a different look at the organizational dynamics, knowing this? And thinking maybe we can take a different look, take a different angle. Next slide, please.
Nico,
So,
just a time check, Nico. We've got 30 minutes left.
Okay, good. So usually we have all of those in our daily life. We have a lot of like authorities, different kinds of authorities, politicians, community leaders, and so on. Can you click once? But in reality, what we do is we seek people like us. And so we connect with other patients, we connect with other clients, we connect with other families, and we have those communities that get together to try and make sense of all that and have a better informed set of information for us to make our decisions. Next slide, please. Well, in companies, you could look at it in pretty much the same way. So you have bosses, communication, training, and all of that. But what you do really is to look at what others are really thinking around you, and you assemble in some sort of tribes to try and understand what other people like you are thinking. So you need to get into this and understand. And in that case, then who is going to copy whom? Who are the real influencers? Because if you want to change to happen, then you need to take this into account. Sorry about this. My dog's barking. Obviously, never at a good time. There you go. Sorry about this. So who's positive, negative influence, and all of that. So that's questions that you're going to have to ask yourself if you want whatever change. And in that case, it was a culture change to be, organizational change to be successful. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide? Yeah. Let's skip that, Philip, if you don't mind, because of the time we have. You're on mute, Philip.
I've shared the link to the video in chat if people want to look at it separately.
Okay, yeah, and we'll just move on. It's a small video that is the metaphor for what mobilizing people around you could look like. And there's a tree in the middle of the road. Maybe you've seen that video before. And you have people, discussing and so on, but there's a little boy that goes and try and moves the tree. Obviously, he's too small, he cannot move the tree, but people are joining him, copying him, and in the end, they manage to move the tree. That was a metaphor for us and our organizational world, where we have lots of people who are commenting things that are happening around that are not doing much. But if you want things to really get going, you need people who are going to show the way, and people are going to follow them. And so in our culture change program, we try to identify those people that others are going to copy and who are naturally influencing others, so that we can work with them to change the culture. Can you go to the next slide? So I don't know if we could change it to 3 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. We're good. We're good to go for that. Yep.
Okay. So just a quick discussion on 3 most critical success factors, according to you, to change behaviors. And we're back in 3 minutes in the main room.
Great.
We'll move on. So I have 2 things I want to cover with you now. So briefly go through the 4 main things that we have injected. We are a vaccines company, obviously. So we've injected in the organization. And then the next one will be about my learnings, or what I take away and what advice I would get if you were going to do something similar. So 4 things. You need to inject behaviors, and I'll cover the other one. So the first one was the behavior. Behavior is something, it may sound really obvious, but it's very important. So being polite is not a behavior. Saying hello when you see someone you don't know is a behavior. So you need to be very precise. It needs to apply to one person, unequivocal. That's what a behavior is. And if you want to change your culture, you first need to define, okay, what behaviors do I want to see? Because culture is actually what we do every day, not what we say, right? So what we did at GSK, and that's the next slide, is we defined 8 behaviors, which are actually 8 questions. And so based on and if you want to connect with me, I can explain in a different forum how we did that and why we did questions. But basically, we wanted to unleash the potential of people, and we felt we should not give answers. We should let everyone find their own answers to questions. And so if the behavior is how am I helping my colleagues, and people is about asking yourself this question, which was a number 3 here, well, then we hope, and this is what we saw, that more and more people are going to help each other because you ask yourself that question, and in your daily life, you're going to think, oh my God, how am I helping my colleague with what I'm doing right now? How am I helping really right now? What have I learned today will trigger some learning and curiosity. Can I do this better differently? Will push the continuous improvement agenda and other things like that, right? And so those are questions on purpose. Next slide. So once you've introduced behaviors, the second thing is to understand who are the people who are going to now push those behaviors. Who are the real influencers? That picture is actually the real network of GSK vaccines in Belgium. And you see some dots here, some nodes who are individuals, and the bigger the nodes, the bigger the level of influence. And then you have connections with all of those peoples. What is important is that those informal influencer, yeah, you can go to the next slide, need to work hand in hand with the formal leaders, because all of them have a role to play. And if you want your behavior change to happen, then your informal influencers are critical to get the whole engine in movement, because they're going to activate their network and they will get you going. But you also need formal leaders who are going to have to be supporting the whole system, and a sort of pilot team, engine team, whatever you want to call it, a project team that is going to have the helicopter view and coordinate the whole thing. I'll come back to that. Next slide. Right, so you have your behaviors, you have your influencers. Now what you need to do is to build or to collect, harness stories and re-inject those stories into the system, because people will remember the stories. And if your culture is a sort of living organism inside your organization that is looking for signals in order to survive, remember I used that image at the beginning of my talk, then stories are going to be their food. They're going to look for stories because this is a confirmation, a social confirmation that this behavior is the right one. So people talk about, oh, you know what, this guy took his bike and came to work because his car was broken, and during COVID, that was really important because then we maintain our level of activity. And that story is going to circulate like hell because people find this heroic, and it will become the social norm and expectation that you do this kind of thing in order to help your colleagues. So stories are going to be key. You need to re-inject them, not necessarily in the formal communication channels, but the informal communication channels. So between your influencers, that your influencers are going to talk about those stories. So you need some sort of orchestration to be very close to the real influencers, informal influencers, for them to tell those stories. Next slide. So stories are there to accelerate the movement, really. So having one story is great. You can get it to, circulate around. 2 stories is interesting. 3 stories is news. So people are going to watch for those stories, and the more you have, the better. Now, the last one, so you have your behavior, you have your influencers who are going formal and informal, who are going to help spread the movement. Stories are going to accelerate that movement. And the last one you need is coordination, orchestration. So you need planets to be aligned. And those are 5 planets that we wanted to get aligned. I think you can click on next and we'll see everything there. The first one is, it's in the official communication. Okay, well, then I need to probably watch that space. I'm not going to change my behavior right now, but I need to watch that space. Second one is, it seems to be important for my boss. He talks about, but he looks really sincere. Okay, so if my boss is starting to do that, I need to pay real attention to this, and probably I will need to change. But you know what? My colleagues don't talk about this too much. Oh, now my colleagues talk about it. So my boss is doing it. My colleagues talk about it. It's in the official communication. I will need to start doing something. But the only, can you go back? But the only moment where I will really start doing something, it's if I'm hearing that it's happening around the organization, not just in my team, because it could just be my team. My boss is changing, my colleagues talk about, but is it, if it's only my team, imagine I need to change to another team, or I have a new boss and then I need to start again. So I'm going to be very cautious. Only when I see that it's happening around the organization, then I start to really be very serious about this. And then my last one will be processes. If processes internally are not aligned to this, say, okay, you tell me to help my colleagues and so on, but I see that people get promoted, um, or people don't behave in that way. So you know what? I'm not going to change my behavior because it's not helping me to survive in this organization. So the last planet will be about aligning the internal processes. And so if you manage to align those 5 planets, if just one of them is not aligned, everyone will align on that planet. So say everything is okay, but my boss is not playing along. I will use this as an excuse to not change. So you really have to use, pay attention to all those 5 different dimensions. And this is where the orchestration is really key, because you need to make sure on each of those that you're progressing at the right pace to get these things to change. Next. Great. So my image is the barbecue thing. And to me, culture is like a barbecue. This is one of the basic principles that we've been using is you don't pay attention to the red, you pay attention to the green. So I'm talking in terms of KPIs here. Most of our, management principles is around the red. So people say, oh, this is not going right, we need to fix it. And so what's wrong with your culture? Let me fix it. There's nothing wrong with a culture. Culture is just the way people are behaving. But the way you're going to make sure that the culture is spreading is you focus on everything that is already hot and you're going to blow on the hot. I know if you've used already barbecue in the past, blowing on cold coal is not going to get you anywhere. You need to blow on the hot one. So you need to look at around in your organization where it's going well, harness stories from that, re-inject the stories everywhere else so that your barbecue is on fire. And once it's on fire, then you can just go and enjoy your drink. This is what you've been dreaming for since the beginning. And so you could cook anything on this culture, performance, innovation, flexibility, anything like this. If you only focus on, okay, I want a culture of performance and you ignore the rest, then probably you're going to fail because culture is more climate that you're creating. It's this whole barbecue thing. And once your barbecue is on, anything can cook on it. Next slide. So I'll go through my sort of learnings and takeaways.
Nico, just a time check. We've got 10 minutes left, Nico.
Yeah, I'll do this for 3-4 minutes and then we open.
All intents and purposes, he'd taken.
Next slide, please. I think I have 2 slides of maybe 3. So I'll go quickly through this. Culture is not engagement. It is not about getting people happy. It's much more than that. You need to work on all sorts of behaviors that are going to be linked to one another, because culture is a system. So you need to look at it as a system and not as something that you tweak here and there, and it will do the trick. No use to do workshops or trainings or anything like this. You need to understand the very fabric of the organization and the informal connections between people so that you can leverage that. At least in our experience, that was very, very powerful. And culture is not about fixing something, focusing on the red. It's about building and shaping, so focusing on the green and what is already going well that you want to push forward. Next slide. In our case, the CEO was completely behind, and I think you need that if you want to be successful to change culture at the scale of a company. What was really interesting in that program is to unlearn a lot of principle I was using and felt, it's just the way it is. Project management kind of thing. I just unlearned that. I realized that organicity is much more powerful than planning, for instance. although you need to have some sort of understanding where you're going. Having detailed planning is not helping you very much. You need to be very much more agile than that. I learned that. I unlearned my default principle, but I unlearned that. Go with the flow. I think orchestration is needs to be very well thought through. And in our case, we are a company of 18,000. We had 10 full-time people working on that, because you need to maintain the connection with the influencers, and that takes a lot of time. It's a lot of coffee drinking and a lot of food taken together with them, a lot of informal conversations with them to keep them minding and caring for them, to be very close to them, so that they are motivated and they want to go ahead and keep doing it. I think identifying the influencers was absolutely key in our case, and it's not just about guessing. It's peer nomination and organizational network analysis helped us to put this in place. And they are the most important assets. This is the most important thing you can ever have in your organization. Once they've been identified and you work with them, you cannot betray them. Betraying would mean like letting them be used or leveraged by their management. They need to be protected at all costs. And then the key thing is how to get leaders on board. If I had to do it again, I would do it differently. I would spend a lot more time explaining to the leaders what we're doing. In this case, we did not ignore them, but we I think did not explain well enough what we were going to do. And so some of them felt a bit left on the side, and they were not used to that. So it took us some energy to try and win them back. And the last slide. It's about you. This whole thing is about your transformation. So I realized this after a while. It's been now 3 years we've been on this journey. And I realized that most of the change that I'm trying to bring to this organization actually happened inside myself. And I did not do that exercise really too much before, of what do I really want to leave behind and what will I want to take with me on the change process. I wish I had done this earlier. I learned on the way, but I could have harnessed a lot more learnings if I had been thoughtful about what I really want to leave behind and what I want to take with me. So, I would say if you want to do something like this, be very thoughtful and intentional about what you want to do. Yeah, I think that's it, Philip. We're going to open the floor for a few questions, maybe, and discussion.
Nico, thank you. We've got a full 5 or 6 minutes left, and we can all go to the spatial chat to carry on the discussion afterwards. And also, Nico has kindly offered to, if people want to reach out to him, then you can do so. I've got a couple of good questions in Menti. Can I start with one of those, Nico, first of all? One person was referring to the bridge erosion slide. It was the red graph with the dots. And it said, the comment is, it's ironic that in a world with digital connection technologies, people are less connected. So, I know the world has changed in 2 years. And the question is there a way to create unplanned encounters digitally?
Yeah, there are tools. It's difficult to be unplanned. You need to plan this, but maybe that's what we will need to learn to do, to be intentional about not planning. So to plan some moment in your agenda where you don't know who you're going to meet, and you have tools like random coffee things that are going to help you meet someone you don't know, but you need to be intentional about building this in your agenda when you work remotely.
Well, actually, the spatial chat is a good way to do that. We can all do that in a few minutes. I'm just going to refer to a question that's in chat now. Deborah C. Deborah, do you want to come off mute and ask that question out loud, Deborah?
Hi, yeah, sorry. Hello, Nico.
Hi.
I'm very interested, obviously, in your kind of experiences with different companies, etc. But I suppose what has been in your sort of in your words, the biggest challenge that you've had? And I suppose, what would you do differently?
I would say the biggest challenge was management, because we focused on informal networks, and I guess we faced resistance. I mean, the higher we went in the organization, the more resistance we were facing.
Yes.
Probably leaders felt threatened by our approach,
Yeah.
and we did not pay enough attention to their frustrations or questions, and we should have invested more time to explain, not just explain intellectually, but also help them emotionally through the journey.
Yeah.
We did not do this enough, and if when I'm going to do it again, I will pay more attention to that, because the informal connections are extremely powerful, but leaders are also very powerful in their way. They can block the whole thing quite easily, and some of them did, because they did not believe in it, and they felt, I don't understand, this is too far away from my way of working, so I'm not going to support that. And just by their behavior, they just killed everything.
Yeah.
In other parts of the organization where leaders really were curious, open, ready to unlearn, happy to go with the flow, or sometimes realizing, really understanding that this informal connection could actually be a very nice complement to their own role, then things went really well.
Yeah.
But so it was very heavily dependent on the way leaders were behaving, and I would do it differently if I were to do it again.
Thank you.
Nico, we're just coming to the ending. Could you, there's a lot of people wanting to reach out to you, and you kindly offered, could you put in chat the best way people could contact you, please?
Yes, of course. There you go. Put my email address.
There we are. And just to, if anyone would like to put any, let's put some comments, some feedback, some gratitude for Nico in the chat. And then let's prepare to go in a moment through to the garden, the spatial chat.
Philip, is there a link to go to the spatial chat, or we need to go back through the map?
There is a link. I'll post it in chat now, or you can go to reception or through the map.
Thank you.